Hey, Fabricators, welcome back to Advancing Fabric. This is our new show, all around the new Microsoft Fabric product, or suite of products, or data platform, the giant big thing full of lots of different workloads and compute and different things for different people that was announced last week at Microsoft Build. Now, if this is the first you are hearing about Microsoft Fabric and you're like, what are these words he's saying? Go and watch our first video. We did a general overview. What is Microsoft Fabric? How you should think about it, where it came from, what are the different pieces that are there under the hood. It is well worth you getting that foundation before you watch this video. Now, if you've watched that, maybe you've watched Microsoft Build, you've watched all the announcement videos, you've seen all the very, very cool keynotes with the glossy transitions and all of the nice, very good sounding marketing. And you're like, well, what does it actually look like? What happens when you just log in and open it up and you sign up for the preview and say, yes, please? You log in. What then happens? Where do you go? We've said you can do Spark, you can do SQL, you can do Power BI, Data Factory, all these things all inside of Microsoft Fabric. What does it look like? How do you start with a Spark notebook? How do you start with some SQL? How do you actually do these things? We thought that would make sense as one of our first videos to really go into, just to open up, take a bit of a tour around the workspace itself, and show you where all these different things are hidden away. Now, there's things like the persona switcher that you'll get used to being thinking about which different persona you're in, all the different objects you're going to see created. We'll take a bit of a step through that and give you that, basically, a little gentle introduction to what to expect when you first open Microsoft Fabric. Now, if it is your first time around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you are looking at this whole world of Microsoft Fabric and you have a ton of questions, let us know down in the comments your questions. We'll be doing some regular kind of Q&A videos, just answering all of your burning questions. The first is already live on the channel currently, so go watch that if you've also got a load of questions. Now, Advanced Analytics have been working with Microsoft for the past 6 months or so in terms of looking at the preview, giving some feedback, working with the team to say, this is what's good, this is what's bad, this is what we like and don't like. Now, I myself have been involved in loads of interesting conversations, but I've not actually done that much hands-on playing around with it recently. So I thought what we'll do is get our Chief Fabricator, the guy who's actually running our R&D, digging into Fabric, looking at how all that stuff works, to come and give you that guided tour for us. So, without further ado, Craig, welcome to the show.
Hello. Good to be here.
Hey, I mean, it's been a long time coming. You've been with us for so long, and you've never been on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I was waiting for that title of Chief Fabricator.
Chief Fabricator, it's a good title. So for those of you who don't, for some reason, don't know Craig, Craig is Microsoft MVP in the data platform side. He's Databricks champion, seasoned data engineer, runs the Data Scotland community up in Glasgow or Edinburgh this year. Done many, many things, seasoned industry pro, and is one of the people behind the Totally Skewed podcast in AA. So you're already out there in the world talking so many things in the community.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for coming and joining us and talking Fabric.
Yeah, been looking forward to it.
I don't know what that picture is. I'm just gonna ignore that. That must be something from the previous old days. Let's just carry on. Cool. Right. So we can see your screen now. We can see this Microsoft Fabric. Do you want to talk us through what we're seeing?
Yeah, sure. So this is essentially going to be the landing page when you come to fabric.microsoft.com. And it's really showing you those different experiences or personas, like you mentioned, Simon, or workloads, whatever kind of naming convention you want to call them. If I go into the one that would be most relevant to me, data engineering, it takes us to a very familiar interface if you've ever used Power BI in the service before. So I can see what kind of new items I can create. And this, again, is geared towards me as a data engineer. I can create Lakehouses, I can create notebooks, Spark jobs, data pipelines, import notebooks as well. And I've got some quick access to things that I've already created, and then some kind of recommended components as well.
So it's fair to say, if there's anyone coming from the Synapse world, this is a world of difference.
Yeah,
if you're looking for your data tab, your develop tab, all of that kind of stuff, that is gone. It's now a pick your persona. Your persona will show you the various things that are relevant for that persona, and it's all much more Power BI than Synapse. Yeah?
Yeah, it's going to be very new if you're coming from Synapse or any other tooling. But kind of carrying that Power BI theme through, everything is sort of wrapped around in workspaces. So I can see all the workspaces I have access to on the left-hand side here. We've got a couple of ones I've created earlier. And like if we go to EU sales, for example, we can see there's nothing created in here. I can go in, I can start creating components, much like I had the option on that first page. Within this workspace, I can create these new artifacts. I can create a lake house, for example. So I can call this one bronze underscore sales if we're following that medallion architecture. And that creates that in the background. And it loads our lake house, and that gives us instant access to be able to see any tables that I would be importing in Delta format, or any files that are brought through in other formats as well. If I go back to a workspace where I do have some pre-created content, we can see that kind of structure building up with all these artifacts in here. We've got that Lakehouse approach of having our UK sales bronze Lakehouse. I've then got the UK sales silver Lakehouse, and then I've switched that around to surface that with a data warehouse using UK sales gold. And within that same workspace, we've got the reports that are created on top of that, any pipelines we're creating. I've got a notebook to actually process that data as well.
I mean, so that's going to make a whole load of sense to anyone coming from the Power BI side of things. They'll be like, oh, it's just Power BI Workspaces, except I've got a load of new artifacts. It's not just data sets and reports and dashboards I can see. Instead, there's lakehouses and warehouses and pipelines, plus data sets and all that stuff. If you're coming from the Synapse side of things, that is a whole world of confusion and chaos. I mean, essentially, it's a bit like saying you're creating separate Synapse Analytics workspaces. If you went into Azure and you created 3 or 4 different full Synapse workspaces, and then you went inside one and you created some pipelines, you created some Spark notebooks, you did all that kind of stuff. Except instead of it having to be each one then needs its own like connection setup and linked services and configuration and security, you've kind of got this layer that keeps them all in the same place. But that's going to be, I think that's going to be tricky for anyone who was very much on the just Synapse side and never really got involved in Power BI. This is going to be a very weird way of working, but you'll get used to it really easy because it's so, the point is it's meant to be quite frictionless, right? Spin up a new workspace, build some stuff in it, and it's a lot easier than deploying a new Azure resource to just create a workspace and get going. Just, it's going to be different.
Yeah, it is quite simple, and it's quite simple to engage with all of those artifacts in here as well. Another thing to point out is we've got source control that wraps around everything, so that will be new from the Power BI perspective. But source controls essentially established.
Power BI developers and source control.
But that's controlled at a workspace level. So although some of these items are currently unsupported because we're still in public preview, you can see I've got uncommitted changes to this very stylish report that I've created. And then I can go into this report. I can see what's created here. This was actually all auto-generated based on me pointing to a specific data set generated in my silver Lakehouse. So that allowed me to essentially create this report, and I can save that and I can push that up to source control, which is fantastic that that's kind of controlling everything all under one hood.
I like that you've kept the time-honored tradition of creating terrible reports on this channel to annoy any Power BI watchers. That's good. I like it. Although you didn't use a pie chart, which is my favorite, to use donut charts everywhere, just to really, really get the ire and disgust up.
I just couldn't bring myself to that. I just...
Cool. Okay.
So yeah, if we think about how we would onboard data and kind of process it through that Lakehouse architecture, I've got a pipeline here that picks up the time-honored classic of AdventureWorks data. And this is essentially the same sort of way you would build your pipelines within Azure Data Factory or Synapse integration pipelines. Nice and easy, picking up a couple of tables and processing them through. If I jump back to my bronze Lakehouse, I can see these delta tables created within my Lakehouse. I can actually preview the data. I've got the option to open them in a specific notebook or a new notebook. I can actually look at the files under the hood as well to take a look at those delta tables. I've brought in some worldwide importers data, which is just in Parquet, so that's showing up in my files section. And I've got all of that data in there as well. So I've got a few different ways to interact with that data. And coming back to the workspace, if I look
so
at
just
the...
on that point, that's gonna confuse a few people, because that really confused me when I first looked at it, right? When they said, okay, you've got tables and you've got files. I'm like, but it's a lake, it's all files. I'm like, yeah, but some of them we've saved as a table because it's been added as a Delta table and we've registered that as an actual Lakehouse table object. If you're coming from the world of Spark, essentially the top bit's essentially your Hive metastore where you've registered the SQL objects. The bottom bit's your lake where you can go and have a look at things. But just be a little bit aware when people first start using it, you'd have these separate, basically you've got two data catalogs, one which is just an unstructured lake explorer, and one which is the structured registered objects that are stored as Delta, that are a little bit more managed, that are ready to go and use as queries. I can see that being a little bit confusing when people first start using it, especially if they're coming from a very lake native side, going, but it's all file.
Yeah, definitely, and it's something that looking at that it's quite difficult to understand to begin with, why I can see them in tables, but I can't see my AdventureWorks files within there. They are still there, but they're just surfaced as tables because they're Delta, so it's a much better way to interact with them. And you can see as I've kind of been flicking through each of these different artifacts that they're building up on the left-hand side. So that gives me a few different shortcuts of things that I've just been jumping in and out of, and I can actually see and go back to. So like the notebook that we created generated the initial cell from this just by simply right-clicking on this table and clicking load data from Spark, and it will just start to give you little hints to kind of carry you along. I want to pull that data out. I'm then doing a little bit of processing on that data, modifying it, and then I'm pushing that to saving that as a table on my Silver data lakehouse. And actually looking at this notebook view, I've got the option to then have a look at that Silver lakehouse from here. So I can go in, I can see the tables in there. So I can see that that's actually pushed that data out to the Silver lakehouse and saved it there. So there's a lot of kind of connecting pieces there, just that visibility across where your data's coming from and where it's going to, just makes it a lot easier to work with.
So your databases and your lakehouses, so we can have a Spark script that reads some data from one lakehouse and it writes it to a different lakehouse. It's not all just creating things within the same object. You can just basically think about your lakehouses as databases that have tables inside of it. So you can read from one lakehouse, write to another. You can read from 5 different lakehouses, stitch it together, write to another one. The thing I've been clarifying in all the other videos is you can't write from one experience to the other. So you can't write in some T-SQL, you can't write to a lakehouse. If you're in Spark, you can't write to a warehouse. That's the only limitation. You can pull things together and then write it across these boundaries. But just get used to the fact that if you can have a workspace that has multiple lakehouses in there, and a lakehouse is just a collection of Delta tables.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So yeah, coming back to that workspace, again, if we think about that persona and what you mentioned, I'm in the data engineering persona. I can switch to my data warehouse persona, and that gives me the ability, again, takes me to that sort of landing page where I've got the option to create new items. I can create a new warehouse, sample warehouse. I can create new pipelines. If I just go to the warehouse that I've already created, so back into the workspace, and then click on my UK sales gold warehouse, I can actually see the data that's stored in there. So looking under that UK sales gold, looking at my schemas, DBO, and then tables.
DBO.
Yeah. Demo purposes. I'll put an asterisk around that not necessarily best practice. I can start to see tables in here as I process them through from my Silver layer. And if I'm bringing them through just using SQL queries, by pointing to that SQL endpoint attached to a lakehouse in the Silver layer, it gives us the flexibility to have that lakehouse approach and then do that last component within the warehouse.
Yeah. And you could already see that, so one of the big questions I've been dealing with, people saying, isn't this just the Synapse rebranded? Isn't it just like the same engine? But you can see that this is different to both dedicated and serverless in terms of just the objects that you have under that database. You got stored procedures, which was notorious because it was never available in the Synapse browser. But you can write stored procedures. Even though it's using the Polaris engine, you can do that stuff. You can have tables. You didn't used to have tables in serverless because they had no concept of, it could do a create external table as and write data, but it wasn't very good at writing data, which this is actually made to write data in a transactionally consistent way down into Delta. And you've got those objects there to represent it. But it's not dedicated because you don't have distributions. You don't need to say, create this using round robin and hash and all. This is a new implementation of that SQL engine. And you have, the browser actually represents the way the objects are different. It's a new experience, right?
Yeah.
So minor rants. Yes. I'll be getting lots of questions on it.
Yeah, so essentially that workspace is your kind of central place for storing everything and working with it. And that's wrapped beyond that or above that with domains. So you can hover over this little indicator up the top to kind of say this workspace is part of the sales domain. And that means that we can have individual workspaces potentially for teams where we're kind of controlling that security at team level, and then have a domain that's wrapped around a full department or a full region within your organization. And it starts to tease out that data mesh approach of being able to have each of these domains and their workspaces and the data within them controlled by those individual teams and departments. So that'd be quite interesting to see how that pans out.
Yeah, because it was certainly a limitation when we're first looking at things of saying, well, if you need to do security at the workspace level, that means you're going to have workspaces with just an absolute massive data in there to try and say, well, this one security group has everything there. So essentially just a higher level grouping of these things to say, these are all related and ownership is shared across these workspaces, but you still have the granularity to break these things up. Makes entire sense. Now, I think as viewers might know my opinions on data mesh, massive supporter of the whole idea and the fan. I'm a fan of it, right? But it's not just a technology. It's always been it's a technology problem, but it's largely an organization and people problem. Now, the nice thing about this is it makes the technology problem super easy. This is if people are using Power BI or people are using T-SQL or people are using engineering, they can create their data products in the same way. They can publish it via a consistent, easy API. There's standards built in because it's storing it all as Delta. So the actual core crux of the problem that you need is to build out the organizational culture of data ownership. And that is not an easy problem. There's still a huge amount of work to do there. But it's really nice that they're tackling, basically saying, okay, let's just stop all the arguments about which technology. That's a really nice way to get people to stand up data products in a consistent way. Now all you have to do is a gigantic organizational and cultural shifts to be able to support the idea of decentralized product domains.
Easy.
Yeah. Hey, it's a great step in the right direction. It's not forcing mesh down the throat and saying it's the only answer and this is going to give you a mesh. It's just giving people the tools that they can do if they've got the organizational buy-in, which is great.
Yeah.
Sorry, diversions. Carry on.
Not at all. So yeah, like as I said, you've got everything in one place within the workspace, and how you process that data is really, like you said in the first, your Lakehouse versus warehouse video. The way you want to process that is going to fit your skill set and your team's skill set. So whether you're using that Lakehouse approach all the way through and you're staying within notebooks, you're using Spark, or if you're actually adopting that data warehouse approach, or even just having that at the last mile within your platform, you've got a lot of flexibility here. Generally, these will be driven by those personas. So those same experiences we saw on that initial landing page, you can control and switch between them here. I imagine if you're not fitting into all of these personas when the security model is refined, then you're not going to be able to see all of these different personas. But it really drives the right experience for everybody without having everything being a completely different experience and a completely different interface.
So there might be some people who their organization has adopted Fabric. They've moved all their Lakehouse and they've built all that stuff, and it is all now end-to-end inside of Fabric. But as a Power BI developer, you log on and you're only allowed to see the Power BI developer experience, and it just feels and looks exactly the same as Power BI always has. It is still the same persona. There will be a huge swathe of people who actually just get that experience and go, well, it hasn't really changed. It's just Power BI. And just where they're getting the data from, maybe they're using Direct Lake on top of the lake, but otherwise it looks and feels exactly as it always would. Or there'll be people who suddenly get a load more personas and a load more tools, and it all depends on how the organization has set up that persona security, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, well, I think that gives people a good idea of what to expect. Knowing that persona switcher down in the left hand, which honestly, I wish they'd made bigger and chunkier and more obvious than hidden away down the left-hand side, but fine, whatever. Just getting used to that idea and knowing it's going to take a little while, I think, until people actually know, right, I'm writing Spark Notebook. Spark Notebook is in the engineering persona. I'm doing some data warehousing, or technically that's in the data warehousing persona because I'm writing some SQL. I'm doing some Spark SQL. Oh, Spark SQL, that's actually in engineering because that's on the Spark engine, not on the... And there's going to be a few getting people used to that mapping of which kind of thing they're trying to do, which persona that falls under, and just getting used to that. But honestly, I don't think it'll take a huge amount of time until people are fairly used to the idea of going, if I want that, I go there. If I want that, I go there. And then you'll find everything actually fairly easily. It's just getting used to that idea of switching hats. And if you wear multiple hats, that's when it gets a bit confusing, but then it does anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm going to bug you to come back and help us with many, many more Fabric videos as we start to lift the lid, as we start to dig into, show us the Spark experience, dig into notebooks, how the notebooks are better than they were in Synapse, dig into the warehouse experience, how it actually works, how we plug into it, how we use the endpoints. So if you built a Lakehouse, how do you connect to that from Management Studio and actually get that experience? So digging through and doing some practical things, I'm going to drag you back in. But yeah, thanks for joining us for the video, Craig.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Alrighty. So, yeah, that should give you a rough idea of what it's like, right? It looks a lot like Power BI. There's a load more extra stuff in there. A lot of the actual how you go about doing things, writing notebooks, writing SQL, that'll be very familiar if you're coming from the Synapse world. It's just, it's in a very more Power BI style UI, and generally the experiences have gotten a lot better from the developer point of view and from how the engines have worked has changed a bit. But not that much to be scared about. So if you're currently using Power BI, you can go ahead and flick that button, turn on the Fabric preview, and you suddenly see all those personas suddenly appear. If you're not seeing them, then it might be down to that security switch. You might not have access to the different personas. You need to talk to your tenant admin about how that's actually working. But yeah, loads more things we need to dig into, loads more videos to come as we explore, and then just generally as we keep up with features as they get added and as we move towards GA, lots more to come. As always, if you were new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know what you're interested in learning about Fabric, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.